This is CyberPunk FM.
Today, the punks discuss Spider-Man.
Welcome to a very special episode of CyberPunk FM. I am your host, Austin Bascle, and joining me today, again, gaming expert and enthusiast, Austin Bascle. Austin, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back again. I didn't think I'd get invited again, so this is great.
Oh no, our episode actually did very well, relative to the rest, if that means anything. And I got some compliments. I'm glad you're back. And folks, today we are going to dive into Spider-Man for PS4, which is, in a word, amazing.
I like what you did there.
Yeah, little puns. I'm usually not a big pun guy, but I think overall, though, you and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were just absolutely floored by this game.
Oh, I loved it. It's probably my game of the year. It's between that and God of War, but I think Spider-Man might have taken it.
Yeah, you know, about halfway through, I thought, no, I think God of War still does X, Y, and Z better, but by the end of the game, I wasn't as convinced.
It's a close race. It's surprisingly close.
Yeah, so just so the listeners know, you will be able to skip to avoid spoilers. We're gonna start off with a spoiler-free section, kind of go over mechanics and whatnot, and then we'll hit some of the story beats later on. But don't worry, we will let you know when spoilers are coming. So if you don't want that story ruined, you will be able to avoid it. Now, Austin, since we both love this game so much, I figure the best thing to do is to hit some of the negatives first and foremost, just right up front. Get those out of the way, and then we can just have 45 minutes of fanboyism.
Sounds great.
Alright, so in this game, you have obviously a web-slinging mechanic where you traverse throughout the city, and parts of it, what they do, how they make use of that are chase sequences. Like maybe you'll chase a villain, sometimes you chase a van. I hated these. The main reason I hated these is because the rubber banding of who you're chasing is so obvious, and the reason they do that, I think, is because they want to put in these story beats there. You have a little dialogue, a little back and forth before you actually catch them, or maybe they want you to catch them in a specific spot. But it's really weird when your little meter says, like, oh, they're 35 meters away, and as soon as you go to grab the van, it's 170.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It never bothered me in the actual, like, in the game. I noticed it, but it wasn't like it didn't detract. But yeah, you can definitely see the rubber banding. It's very obvious, and they don't do anything to really hide it.
Yeah. I mean, if you thought Mario Kart Blue Shell was bad, just check these out. Secondly, the game has several stealth sections where you play as either Miles Davis / Morales and Mary Jane, and they're not terrible by any means. I've certainly played worse stealth sections, but there were a couple of them where I felt it really kind of killed my momentum, and I ended up, going to sleep for the night or doing something else.
This is done with Spider-Man for the day.
Yeah, did you have a problem with these at all?
I'll say that the early ones are a bit slower because as you go along, they give you more tools and more ways to interact with these. And as they do that, I feel like they open up a little bit. They become more engaging. But in the beginning, I can definitely see it kind of killing your momentum because it's just hiding from people. And when the game is based around, swinging around the city and fighting a bunch of bad guys, that really breaks the flow of the game.
Yeah, it's not quite as exciting when you're hiding behind boxes.
Of course.
But yeah, later on in the game, they, like you said, they give you a few more tools. There's one part with Mary Jane where you actually call Spider-Man down to come pick up guys that are in the way and web them. So they do introduce mechanics to make the later ones smoother, but there were a couple at the beginning I thought were kind of hard.
I can understand that. It didn't really bother me. It didn't take me out, and I think I prefer engaging with it over just watching a cutscene. But I can see where maybe they went on a little too long, or you would prefer to just watch it instead of have to play this forced stealth section.
Yeah, and again, these are nitpicks because overall the game was fantastic. So nitpicky things, but we gotta get them out the way. Another one, so you have an upgrade system where you unlock new suits, which then give you new suit powers, and you have gadgets that you can upgrade. There's a handful toward the end of the game that I really couldn't get to because they were going to make me do a lot of these challenges or these research station things that, frankly, at that point in the game, I had zero desire to do. So that was a little upsetting because some of them looked cool, but again, it's not a huge deal because I feel like if you're willing to put in the time, they're not that hard to get.
Yeah, I went for 100% in the game. I actually got my platinum trophy, got 100% in the game, and they never felt like too out of place. I actually liked some of the challenges because I think the challenges do give you some different variety. There's stealth sections where you have to take different areas and like grab different people really quickly, and that's a different take on the stealth gameplay, because the stealth gameplay for Spider-Man that they usually have was pretty slow. You had to like kind of walk around, take one guy at a time. These force you to kind of go fast with it. You have to kind of map out your route really quickly. I felt some of that stuff was exciting, but it is out of the way. It takes you out of the story, it takes you out of the core of the game, and forces you to do a bunch of side things to upgrade.
Yeah, at the end of the day, not anything that really ruined my enjoyment of the game, but was something I think maybe could have been designed slightly better, but a nitpick. That's the theme of this past 5 minutes, is nitpicks. So.
A lot of nitpicky small things.
To finish up with the ultimate nitpick, man, there were so many times where you're in not Spider-Man mode, so you're just Peter Parker, and you have to interact with something on a table, and for the freaking life of me, I'm like walking in circles trying to get this triangle thing to pop up. A particular time I remember is when you're crawling in a ceiling vent somewhere. I think it was like when well, I don't want to spoil anything yet, and you have to you're in the vent system and you have to drop down. So you know that there's this vent here that you just have to hit triangle, and he's walking around like a freaking handicapped spider, like bumping into walls, turning with the, finesse of like an early Resident Evil game. And I can't get him to just open the vent. Like it was killing me. But that's it. We're done now. The negativity is over. Let's get into what Austin said earlier may well be Game of the Year. Austin, why don't you start us out with the combat system?
Yeah, so the combat is very much based in kind of Arkham, like the Batman Arkham games, where...
Or like Shadow of Mordor, if you're familiar with that.
Is a lot of dodging. You press circle to dodge. There's like a little Spider Sense logo. Basic combos, punching. You get to use a web slinging mechanic where you can like grab people, pull them to you. It's very much a flow type of combat system where you're comboing, hitting one guy, bouncing to the next guy, kind of keeping momentum going.
Yeah, and there's a bit of an emphasis on, I guess you'd say, aerial combat, because you can launch foes into the air, and there's several upgrades that actually boost the amount of focus you get, which is, the thing that allows you to perform like the special finishers. When you hit people in the air, and then while you're in the air, there's a lot of moves you can use to pull people up or pull yourself down, ground stomp, and there's this really cool flow between the ground combat, the air combat, the gadgets, the web slinging, jumping off the walls. I mean, there's so many tools at your disposal for these combat situations, and it really makes the combat a lot of fun all the way through the end of the game, because you never run out of new things to try if you choose to try them.
And it's hard, like especially initially, like whenever you don't have a lot of tools, whenever you're not familiar with it, you need to be really good at dodging. You have to dodge right on time, or you're gonna get ganged up by like 6 different people, and you will not be able to get out of it. Like, it's rough in those early stages, but it helps you to appreciate once you get a lot of things and can start chaining combos really well, jumping from one guy to another, pulling a guy up in the air, throwing him back to the ground, using a web bomb. Like, using all of those mechanics in conjunction is really satisfying once you get the hang of it.
I was getting my ass kicked so bad the first time you fight the demons. Just every time I was roaming the city trying to solve a little crime, because at the beginning of the game they're just these little thugs with like assault rifles, robbing liquor stores or something. They're really easy to beat up. When those demon guys come out, I mean, I was getting destroyed. The RPGs particularly that you have to dodge constantly, man, yes, those were killing me.
They're rough, and that's to kind of talk. I don't want to get too out of topic, but that kind of goes into the upgrade system, where you can start building those skills and different things where you can grab the rockets and throw them back at people. Like, stuff like that really changes the way you interact with these encounters. It gives you so many more options, and I think that's when the game really shines, is you get all these tools that you can use to take down these encounters that before were like, this is really hard. Now it's like, look at all these things I can do, and it makes it a lot easier but more satisfying.
And speaking of these Arkham mechanics, I liked the stealth in this game a lot more, because often in the Arkham games I felt really compelled to use it, and that like if I didn't, I would be at a huge disadvantage. Whereas in Spider-Man, it felt more like when I pulled it off properly, it was an advantage rather than a disadvantage for not doing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never considered, but I think that's definitely true. It feels like you're encouraged to use stealth, but you're never like required to use stealth. And they give you specific stealth tools like the trip mine and impact web that can be really useful for stealth, but it's never really necessary.
Well, I love how you can do a lot of work separating out the enemy patrols with various tools to get their attention. So if you know that stealth killing this guy will alert these other ones, you can kind of draw him away first. And I can't remember having as much ease of doing that in Batman.
Yeah, the Arkham game is really kind of emphasized like one or two things. Like you hop up on top of a gargoyle, then pull a guy up. And like that's kind of it. I feel like Spider-Man kind of varied those situations up a little bit. You had different approaches. You can, do a perch takedown where you're kind of up on a perch and grab somebody and pull them up. Or you can web strike takedown and like kind of go down to them, and it changed how you had to do the next, like how you had to take down the next enemy.
Yeah, and overall, the way that the stealth then blends into, the regular combat when you're spotted, the way you can switch between any given move you've unlocked and gadgets so like seamlessly, the way you kind of slide under enemies or jump over enemies, do your little swinging web pendulum kick, dodge against the wall and launch off. Pull down barrels and throw boxes and pull down scaffolding. I've never played a game where I felt like I had so many things at my disposal.
And the best thing about it is that they all work really well in conjunction. Like, it never feels like one of them is out of place. It's like, okay, yeah, that's easy to do. Like, it's easy to switch to a gadget. It's easy to swing a box around and smack somebody with it. All of it works together really well, where it all feels like the same combat system. It doesn't feel like it's pulling different genres or like this mechanic just feels out of place. It all works together really well.
There were definitely a handful of gadgets I never really used. Mainly, I think the last two I never unlocked because I didn't have enough challenge tokens. But there were a couple, such as the electric web or the little drone, that it wasn't even a matter of them not being any good. It was just a matter of having so many that I almost forgot about them. Because there were so many things you could do at any given point, I couldn't keep track of, all 30 of them.
I will say that, like, towards the end of the game, I found myself combining gadgets a lot more, using them together, like using a web bomb and, getting 6 enemies caught in a web, and then throw out a spider drone, and you can just clear out mobs really easily, and it works really well.
The game does an amazing job of rewarding that creativity in combat. I know there's a lot of games of this nature. Like you were saying with Batman, it's hard to want to use all the tools in there because just punching them is so often the best way to go. But in here, I always felt like I didn't waste my time or I didn't waste resources. I felt like I was rewarded for exploring all those different options.
For sure, and you get gadgets back so quickly in combat too. Like, you never have to worry about like running out of a gadget because you're gonna get it back pretty quickly, and that means that it encourages you to try those things because you're not worried about running out of things or, oh, I'm not gonna have enough trip mines. Like, you'll get one back in 2 minutes. Just use it.
So let's move on to what I think definitely got the most hype pre-release. And that was, the traversal, the web slinging. Austin, what was your favorite part of that?
So I think the web swinging, for me, the best part of it is that it keeps your momentum at all times, especially once you learn how to do it. Early on, you'll find yourself kind of hitting walls and like running into things like, okay, I don't know the best way to do this yet. Like, once you really get a hang of it, you can move around the city so quickly and with such ease, and it's fast, it's fluid. It feels really good to jump off of a roof, zip to a point, bounce off of it, then like just glide into like a swinging motion, and then run along a wall. Like, it all just flows really seamlessly. I know I keep using the word flow a lot, but like that's
a good
what
word.
this game does.
It really does describe how it feels.
Yeah, it just, everything flows off of each other really well, especially once you start getting some of the later web swinging abilities, which is something I really liked.
Yeah, there were a handful that I kind of wish you had from the start, but honestly not that many. I felt that most of the ones that were essential you had from the beginning. What did you think about the fact that there's no fall damage?
I mean, I think the game would have suffered if there was fall damage, so I'm glad there was none. Like, I think, personally, I would have gotten really annoyed if I would fall while I'm trying to do some cool web swinging stuff, miss, fall, and die. Like, that would have ruined all of my momentum and flow, so I'd have been really mad about that.
The first couple times it happened to me, I thought it was really jarring, but that also ended up being kind of the only times it ever happened to me, because I feel like once you get the hang of the web slinging, you really have to mess up to ever hit the ground.
True.
Because you have so many options between running on the walls, the zip point jump thing, just the swinging, that you really have to, like, just basically be in an area with no buildings and hit the wrong button to hit the ground.
Right. And even then, like, there are tools later in the game, like the quick recovery, where you roll on the ground and then you can jump, just like if you're a point boosting. Like, you roll on the ground and jump forward, and it can keep your momentum going. So even if you hit the ground, there's a way to bounce off of that and keep moving. And I thought that was really cool.
Now, there's a fast travel system in the game, but I found myself using it maybe 3 or 4 times, and that's it. And that's partially because I don't know, I guess the distance in this game is measured in meters, right? It's an M. God knows if it's actually representative of a real meter. But the island only seems, like 5,000 or 6,000 long?
Yeah, it's...
Maybe?
I'd say that's pretty accurate, yeah.
And anytime your objective is within, 3,000, it's literally faster to just go there than it is to wait through the 2 loading screens of the fast travel. So there was really only a couple times where I happened to be on, like, the opposite side of the map that I used fast travel. Otherwise, Spider-Man does what Spider-Man does.
Right. I definitely used it a couple times in my hunt for platinum when I had to go from, one side of the city for a side quest to the other side. Or, like, there was a crime in this district and I was all the way in this other one. It always just felt better for me to swing.
Yeah, and, I definitely prefer fast travel systems over not having it, because I think with most games, when you get toward the end, you just don't want to do all that traveling. But this was one of the few games where, up until the very end, I was still having a blast just moving through the city.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with this game, is that is one of the highlights of it, is just its movement and its traversal. Using a fast travel system, while it's nice to have it, it does take away one of the core elements of the game, and that's just movement.
And I think one of the most impressive things is how, in some of the older Spider-Man games from years past, your webs would kind of just stick in midair. They didn't necessarily attach onto anything. In this game, every time you web sling, it is actually attached to something. And if you're above the buildings, you can't actually web sling. Now, there's plenty of other mechanics. There's the, what is it called, zip point?
A point launch, something like that.
Point launch, yeah. Which where he kind of shoots himself toward an item or an object, and as soon as he hits it, he springs off of it. There was running on the rooftops and parkour, so there's still plenty of mechanics to use, but you never just attach to nothing. So it's your kind of physics and momentum feel really, they're gamed a little bit here and there, but it feels really realistic because everything is actually based on you attaching to a physical point rather than, just kind of flying through the air mysteriously. So since we've already brought it up a little bit here and there, why don't we get into some of the, I guess what you would call them as RPG mechanics? Just, the customization, the gadgets, etc. Did you enjoy kind of that progression and unlocking those things?
Yeah, I definitely think I did. Games that overwhelm you with these, like, customization options, I'm going to use Witcher 3 as an example, because I think that game just, it has way too many options and way too many, like, different branching paths that don't mean a lot. And I felt like this game, all of its upgrades were big enough that they mattered. I never felt like you were forced to upgrade all of your gadgets all the way, or you had to fill out every skill tree, but all of them felt helpful.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There was never really any of them where I thought, wow, that would have been useful, 10 hours ago, can't believe they didn't give me that. But every time I got one, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. This improves stuff, right? It never felt like it was something missing, but it always felt like a nice addition, too.
Every new skill makes combat a little bit better. Like, it makes it a little bit easier, because early on, you can't necessarily swing people around. But then you get the ability to swing people around, you web them up, and you can swing them just like swinging objects. And that made things a little bit easier. It gave you another tool in this already kind of pretty big combat system. you had another new tool to use, and it made things just a little bit easier and a little bit more satisfying. And I felt like every single upgrade did that.
And just when any of them kind of started to feel a little too powerful, you would be introduced to a new enemy who just negated it. or you had to, kind of come up with a more creative solution. So I just really felt that the way the skills played out in combat was really balanced, it was really fun. And compared to even something like God of War, which I love that game, but I mean, dude, there were so many skills in there I unlocked and then just never bothered using.
Oh yeah, for sure. I didn't use most of the skills I got in God of War.
Yeah, that was one where I found out what worked and I stuck to it.
Right, and Spider-Man, you can do that, but to a degree, but it encourages you not to so often, because every time you get a new skill, it becomes really useful. But like we were saying earlier, aerial combat's a really big part of the game. But then they introduce whip enemies that will grab you out of the air and throw you to the ground. And so then you have to start using some of those ground-based skills that you got to defeat those guys. So every new upgrade, every different skill mattered in a different way.
The pacing of the unlocks was usually pretty good as far as the new gadgets, because you kind of get them through the story. At least the initial one, I guess you upgrade later kind of at your own pace. Or maybe as you gain levels, I think is what it was.
Yeah, they were usually based around the tokens for the gadgets, like the crime tokens, the backpack tokens, the research tokens, That's usually how you upgraded your gadgets. Suits,
I guess
suits were done by levels.
We should go ahead and just talk about that a little bit. Instead of having, this awful array of crafting materials looking at you every game in the last 10 years.
I'm about to say all of them?
you would do various, I guess, missions around. You had these challenge things we talked about earlier, which were just really tough, like mechanical things. You had more storyline things, such as the research facilities. It's like Harry Osborn's little science project scattered around. Clear out bases full of enemies to get base tokens. You would collect photos of landmarks. So there were little activities you would do to get these materials that you would then use to upgrade. And it was obvious how to get them. You knew where they were. You could get them kind of at your own pace. It was never, oh gosh, where do I get, the Heart of Firestone or whatever to craft. Yeah, thank God, that was what I hated about God of War was toward the end of the game, there were all these things I really wanted to upgrade to, but if you didn't Google them, I mean, you would have no idea where the hell to get them.
Right, and you can't look around the whole map to find all that. But this game just gives you, at the very beginning, satellites all throughout the map, and is like, find these satellites, and it'll show you everything in the city. And then you could just go do it.
Yeah, it kind of has that standard, Ubisoft open world, go unlock the towers thing, in order to explore the map. But honestly, I did all of those so quickly because they don't feel as sporadic and spaced out as, some of those Ubisoft open world games. This felt a lot more confined into your little districts. They were easier to unlock. I think I had them all done within, the first couple hours of the game.
Oh yeah, I did them almost immediately, and it never felt like I was really going out of my way for it, because I enjoyed swinging around the city. I enjoyed moving around the city. So getting to them was really easy. And I know there was some controversy, like pre-release, of like, oh great, we're doing this whole Ubisoft find the tower, open up the map thing. But when the game is so based around moving around it and traversing around it, I didn't mind going find those because that was fun. Like, that was an engaging part of the game.
Yeah, and then I guess the last little bit to get into this was all the different suits. Now, I know you're a big fan of the comics, so you probably recognized a lot more of these than I did. Some of them look super cool, for sure. There's actually a kind of comic book style one later on where you kind of look cel-shaded. But, dude, for the most part, I'd say 80% of them, to me personally, just looked goofy as hell, and I did not want to wear them.
I would say the biggest issue, I guess, and I really like this, that the game kept your suit that you were wearing in cutscenes, because I always find that really jarring whenever it's like, I'm in this suit for the game, but the cutscene puts me in my normal clothes or whatever. I really liked that it kept you in the suit, but some of the suits were really jarring to be in a cutscene, and it was like, you look really weird in this really dramatic, serious moment, and you're wearing like your weird wrestler outfit.
Yeah, there's a part late in the game where you have a very emotional moment with MJ, and I was wearing the comic book one, and she's sitting there, almost in tears, and I look like a dude straight out of Tales from the Borderlands, and it was just so dumb. Like, I was laughing. I was like, man, I have to change out of this the second this cutscene ends, because this is just ruining the kind of tension at the end of the game.
Right, like, it's a really cool suit, whenever you're flying around the city and fighting bad guys, but whenever you're doing anything in the story, it feels weird and jarring.
Yeah, and so along those lines, why don't we talk a little bit about the presentation and the graphics? I mean, the game is absolutely gorgeous. I thought it ran really smooth. There was one part late in the game where you're in this kind of nightmare zone, and there's a lot of particle effects that it kind of slowed down a little bit. But other than that, I mean, we're talking perfect frame rate, and the graphics are beautiful. The art design is terrific. How'd you feel about that?
Yeah, I thought it's one of the better looking games I've seen. Just the whole world feels very alive. It looks very good. Never really had any frame buffering. Never had anything really issues. I will say I ran into a couple issues where enemies would get like stuck in the geometry, and I'd have to like punch them through the geometry, and it would like not pick it up very well, and I'd have to like hope my last kick of a combo would actually hit them. But really, other than that, I mean, technical wise, it ran really well.
Yeah, there were a handful of bugs here and there, but honestly, I think I only remember them because there were so few. Like, the one or two stood out. I mean, this game was honestly very technically impressive for how big it is and how massive it is.
Definitely. This is no Skyrim, where, like, everything you're doing is like, oh, look at that weird floating mammoth. Like, it's not that. It runs really well. There's very few bugs. And it just looks amazing.
It really does. And, it launched with the photo mode, so you can do that. I know your friend Connor has been posting pictures from it on Facebook constantly, and they all look really cool. I mean, it really is just a gorgeous game. It always is impressive to me, because, I'm primarily a PC gamer, and I shit on consoles a lot. So when a developer is able to get what they got out of this game, out of a machine like this, I mean, I'm blown away.
Along those lines, I thought the motion capture and voice acting were probably the strongest points of the kind of presentation in the game. What did you think?
Oh yeah. Oh, those were phenomenal. There's a specific scene I'm thinking of where Peter and Mary Jane are in an apartment, and they're kind of going back and forth and talking and walking in and out of this room. And there was a point where I actually felt like I was watching a Marvel movie, not necessarily because it looked exactly like one, but the conversation was so natural, the motion capture and the animations were so fluid, the dialogue was so well written. I mean, I was surprisingly immersed in a video game cinematic, which frankly does not happen much for me.
For sure. The chemistry of these actors is phenomenal. I just want to give credit to the ones I think are the best here. Yuri Lowenthal plays Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Tara Platt plays Yuri Watanabe. William Salyers plays Otto Octavius, and Laura Bailey plays Mary Jane, and they are all exceptional. And they all have really good chemistry with each other. Like, especially Yuri Lowenthal as Peter with literally anybody is amazing. Like, they play off of each other so well. It feels like they're in this, it feels real. And that's something that you don't always get from a video game, kind of cinematic or any type of story element in a game. You're like, oh, this is a game. But it felt really authentic.
Yeah, there's really not any bad voice acting in the game, but those four in particular were just so good. I mean, I'm just really impressed by the work that they put into not just the voice acting, but whoever's doing the writing and the dialogue nailed it. The facial animations are so good. I mean, when people are distressed or they're mad or they're annoyed, I mean, it really shows up.
Yeah, there's some scenes late game that I'm obviously not going to spoil, but the facial animation stuff really shines. Like, you see, it's like, that's a human being. Like, they look real. Yeah. You can see every expression, every emotion, all the pain, all the, kind of concern, worry. All of that stuff shows up so well without even the voice acting. Like, you can just see it on their face.
Yeah, I was just blown away at so many parts of this game in that regard. I normally think, immersion is kind of an overrated aspect of video gaming that people kind of hold up as this, Shangri-La that I don't think is very often actually obtainable. But man, this is about as close as it comes.
Definitely. I think immersion is a good word to use here, because I felt immersed in, almost every story beat. I was like, this feels real. It feels genuine. I'm fully invested in this.
Okay, folks, so here is your first and final warning. Spoilers ahead. If you would like to skip the spoiler section and just go to our closing thoughts, then you can skip to 58 minutes and 39 seconds. But here we go, Austin. Why don't you kind of start us out with where it starts in the story, because this is not a Spider-Man origin story.
No, this Spider-Man has been active as Spider-Man for 8 years now. The game kind of throws you right into it. You wake up one morning and Wilson Fisk, Kingpin of Crime, is kind of on his last days. His days are numbered. Not, he's not dying, but the police are surrounding his headquarters and they're ready to arrest him. And you find out this has been a thing that Spider-Man's kind of been building to for 8 years now. He's been trying to take Kingpin down, and it's finally happening, and it just kind of throws you right in there.
I really liked that aspect of it because, I recently saw Spider-Man Homecoming, and I was really surprised how much I enjoyed that. And part of, I think, why I liked that one was it wasn't an origin story either, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily start at the same time period as far as 8 years into it. I think he's still really young in that movie. But you don't have to go through the story that anyone who knows anything about Spider-Man has already seen a dozen times.
Right, like we've been there, we've done that. We know he gets bit by the spider. We know how he gets his powers. We know he builds his web shooters. Like, we know that already. Give us what being Spider-Man is all about. And I think that's what this game really does well.
And so the game, I guess, is divided into 3 acts, right? And the first act is much more lighthearted for sure. Right after you get done with kind of getting Kingpin in prison, you're introduced to a lot of the different characters. While you're fleeing around the city, the player gets to hear J. Jonah Jameson's radio show, which is very Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Alex Jones. I mean, he's just ranting about Spider-Man conspiracy theories. It is hilarious. I absolutely loved it.
It's amazing. The guy who does J. Jonah actually plays Reinhardt in Overwatch, which is something that I can never not think of now. But he does such a good job of like getting that kind of, like you're saying, that kind of Alex Jonesy type, conspiracy theorist, crazy, like Spider-Man is the root of all evil, and it's so funny, and I never wanted to I never got tired of those bits.
Yeah, there were times I'd be about to head to a mission marker, and I know it was going to cut it off, and I would just stop so I could hear the rest of his, conspiracy ribs. And people call in and they try to defend Spider-Man, and he'll just cut them off. And even when it's like, I think there was an Army veteran, and he just cuts them off, and he's like, "Well, I disagree. Thank you for your service. Bye." And
those moments are great, and it's a lot of little moments like that really kind of help make the story shine. Especially early like that. Like, Spider-Man will make a lot of quips and a lot of things. I mean, Spider-Man is a quip guy. Like, that's what he does. But you'll hear a lot of these little tidbits. He'll talk about what's in his backpacks. A lot of those little bits really help make this story feel full, I guess. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but like, the world is large. There's a lot going on. And these characters, it all feels lived in, like everybody has their histories, and you kind of get all of that.
I can't even remember, I guess, the overall plot of the first act because it just seemed like a very introductory thing. But whatever it was good. I remember that. It's just so much happens in Act 2 and 3.
Right. Early on is like fine. There's nothing really exciting going on, I think. But it's the end of that act that really kind of propels everything forward.
Is the end of that act the campaign speech explosion?
Yes, that is the end of that act.
All right, why don't you take us through a little bit of that and transitioning into Act 2?
You meet up with a cop. His name's Jefferson Davis, and he helps Spider-Man out in this particular situation with the demons. And you are...
The demons being kind of like a gang, not literal demons, although supernatural stuff is involved. A little confusing, but basically a gang of sorts that has some powers.
Right, they're kind of trying to take over Fisk as a crime ring that he had set up. Now that Fisk is gone, there's kind of this vacuum, and the demons are kind of moving into that ring. And Jefferson Davis helps take Spider-Man down, and he's given this award ceremony, and his son Miles is there, and his wife's there, and everything's gone smoothly. And the next thing you know, the demons show up, and they're you notice 5 or 6 of them. They're all suicide bombers. And Spider-Man's spider sense goes off, and then just explosions rock throughout this whole campaign speech, award ceremony thing. And the game takes a huge tonal shift at that point that I thought was just incredible. It really propels the game forward. What were your feelings around that time?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great shift as well because the first act, there were a few serious moments here and there for sure, particularly with some of MJ's like investigation, because you like know something sinister is going on. But it's still lighthearted. It still just feels like kind of a Saturday morning cartoon. But once that explosion hits, because Davis dies in the explosion, and you end up playing even a little stealth section as his son Miles, which Jefferson Davis and Miles Davis, like, that still cracks me up.
His name is technically Miles Morales.
So is that like his mom's name?
Yeah, his mom's name is Rio Morales, and he takes his mom's name for whatever reason. I don't know the canon like Spider-Man reason, but
Right. But yeah, and there's a funeral afterwards, and I mean that was the moment where I was first like, wow, like really blown away by the ability of the voice actors and the motion capturing and whatnot to really convey that emotion, because I mean you really feel it crawling through the aftermath of those explosions, and there's people being shot by these demons right in front of you, and Miles is like clearly terrified.
It's intense. Like it was surprisingly, because like you said, everything before that was really like kind of lighthearted, and it was fun. You're like, okay, this is exciting, and then it all of a sudden gets really dark, and you're like, man, this is crazy.
So at this point, you start to suspect Martin Lee, I think, in some way or another, and that's where most of Act 2 really takes off, is because Aunt May and Martin Lee work together at Feast, which I forget exactly what Feast stands for, but it's like a homeless shelter kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know the acronym either, but it's basically a homeless shelter for people who are kind of down on their luck and stuff.
Yeah, and you go in there and you discover that Lee has been working with these demons, and at some point you do another chase sequence, and you find out that he's been leading them, and he has these weird kind of ethereal powers, and that's really where Act 2 picks up, is kind of figuring out why Martin Lee is doing what he's doing and how to stop him.
So one of the things that I found most engaging about the story, and it kind of builds off of, you're discovering what Martin Lee is doing, and you find out that his kind of role, he's going after Norman Osborn, who is the mayor of the city. We all know who Norman is if you know anything about Spider-Man. Yeah. And one of the things I really love about the story is that it kind of positions him as the motive for all these villains. Like, he is the villain without ever becoming the Goblin. Like, everybody knows he becomes Green Goblin and all that stuff, but they never go into that, and yet he still feels like the villain of so much of this game.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the way that they made him mayor and how they played that off. That didn't really seem forced at all. I mean, and he just kind of plays that, kind of uppity, sinister politician role. And yeah, like you said, he pulls off being the central villain without being the Goblin at any point. It's really well done.
Right, like he never does anything incredibly antagonistic, like to Spider-Man, or in the game, he's not really positioned as the antagonist at first glance, but when you kind of figure out the layers of like Martin Lee, of what his motivations are, and all of these things, you see that he kind of is the villain of this whole thing, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and and up to this point, Peter's job is he works as kind of a lab assistant for Dr. Octavius, and well, obviously, if you know anything about Spider-Man lore, you know that he becomes Dr. Octopus, and I kept... It was really cool because obviously since you know this ahead of time and they assume that he becomes Doc Ock, they kind of drop all these little clues here and there. This kind of tension builds up with his kind of failing health, and you're constantly designing these sort of synthetic and robotic limbs that can be controlled by the mind and whatnot, and it all kind of points toward the fact that eventually, like, Doc Ock has to become Dr. Octopus because of his sort of failing motor skills.
Definitely. I actually, at the beginning of the game, I was wondering if he was going to become Doc Ock. I was like, are they going to go the Doc Ock route immediately? Is, maybe Martin Lee going to be the central villain? Are they going to do something else with this? But then as you progress, you slowly start to see him become a little bit more unstable, both physically and mentally. And at one point, Norman actually confronts Otto and tries to shut down his lab. And it's around that point that you kind of start to see more of this Norman being the villain, kind of being the shady politician, and it's clear that Otto has a history with him. And it's from that point that you can see, like, okay, Dr. Octopus is coming, and it was more of how that happens rather than will it happen. And I thought that was really cool, too.
Yeah, and really the focus of Act 3 is, you come to eventually find out that the way Lee got these weird powers was some strange experiment that Osborn did on him, it seemed like they were making it, like Osborn was definitely trying to help, but the experiment goes wrong and ends up killing Lee's parents. And then, of course, you find out that he steals all of Dr. Octavius's research and kind of takes over the company. So both of these guys have this huge resentment for Norman Osborn, and that kind of influences their Act 3 crusade.
Right. It's definitely shown in a way that Norman is trying to be a good man, trying to help, but it's like he's taking shortcuts. He's the slimy politician. He's like, well, I'm gonna help, but I'm not necessarily gonna go about it in all the right ways. And he starts to like rush things, and he's trying to move things along faster than they should be. And that's why this experiment goes bad, and that's why Martin Lee becomes Mr. Negative, and he gets all these demon powers that help him lead the demons. And eventually, Dr. Octopus forms the Sinister Six, and I think that's kind of where Act 3 kind of takes off, and you really see Doc Ock come up with this grand plan to get at Norman. How did you think all that kind of played out?
That was awesome because they kind of reveal it to you a little slowly. Like, they definitely put some hints out. Like, I know there's a part where you go into Doc Ock's lab, and there's a bulletin board where Peter has collected pictures of all of the 6 villains that eventually become part of the Sinister Six.
Yeah.
And Doc Ock's just like, wow, so smart, Peter, like keeping track of your enemies like that, or whatever he says. And
right.
So the foreshadowing was maybe a little heavy-handed, but the eventual reveal of the plan was fantastic because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but he basically realizes that all of these villains are obligated for some kind of debt, or they have a criminal record, and he basically, or I think like Vulture has a spinal disease, and he comes up with a way to solve all of their problems if they will just pull off this one last job for him. And when you finally discover Doc Ock's lair and you look through these recordings and these diagrams and these blueprints, it's really cool, it's really convincing, it's really smart. Like, I really like that part of the story.
That's definitely one of the better parts, because just when you get there, you see all of this planning and you realize how incredibly smart Doc Ock actually is. He has his octopus arms and everything, but his real supervillain power here is his intelligence. And you see the way he formulates this plan, and even Vulture says a line like right after that mission, like, it's nice to work with a man like Dr. Octavius. He has backup plans for his backup plans. Like,
yeah,
he thought 5 steps ahead for everything, and he's going to make this work, and he is going to get his revenge on Norman. And it's really cool to see that relationship with Peter and Dr. Octavius kind of crumble in those last hours because it was built up so well.
Yeah, we talked about the relationships earlier. The one between Peter Parker and Otto Octavius is stellar. Just, you can tell how much he admires the Doctor, how much the Doctor, like, loves the fact that, appreciates Peter's efforts and his work. And seeing that crumble really did, it was really emotional. It had me on the verge of tears.
It works super well. The whole end of the game really has you on the verge of tears because it's a culmination of so many of these character arcs. Like, the game gives you these relationships, and it kind of brings them all to a close in a really satisfying way at the end of the game. And that's that's the thing I think that this game does really well, is relationships. And to see them all kind of come to a satisfying resolution like that feels really good.
Act 3, there's a couple parts I felt the pacing was a little weird because you go to fight the various heroes, or the villains, and what is it? It's Vulture, Shocker, Rhino, Scorpion. Who am I missing?
Mr. Negative and Dr. Octopus would be the last two.
And so, for instance, you go fight Rhino and Scorpion, and it's actually... first you go to fight Shocker and Vulture, right?
Technically it's Electro, but close enough.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's Shocker? Is that even a Spider-Man villain?
Shocker is a Spider-Man villain. They're basically the same. It's really weird that they have 2 electric villains that are virtually the same.
Yeah, but when you go fight Electro and Vulture, the fight itself I thought was a lot of fun. They make a really good use of the mechanics, and you kind of dodge around, you stay airborne, but the actual plot of it gets wrapped up extremely quickly. It's like they're released to go do something, you go find them, and you lock them up. And then you get to Scorpio, who you have to go through this weird LSD dream sequence for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then you fight him and Rhino at the same time in 5 minutes and lock them up. So it was weird that they spent so much time on Scorpion compared to the rest of them, I thought. But it doesn't necessarily not work. I mean, it's still very interesting. The fights are a hell of a lot of fun. And you kind of get past that and you start to go chase down Martin Lee.
Yeah, I thought those fights worked well. I will say that the weird, like, trippy dream sequence thing felt a little bit out of place while I was doing it. I didn't mind the actual scene, but kind of thrown in there was like, I don't know why this is necessary, but...
Well, I think my biggest part or problem with it was, we've talked about how awesome it is to swing around and do all the different moves, and you get in this dream sequence, and there's seriously this 2-minute part where you're just crawling slowly on the wall, and you can't do anything else. Yeah. And it just feels like you're so hamstrung because you're so used to being able to maneuver, with the grace of a falcon, and just
right.
nothing. You're crawling like a turtle.
It's a very strange sequence. I think it works from like a story element to kind of see Peter's kind of mental state at this time. You kind of see him blaming himself for some of this stuff, and that kind of works, but the actual gameplay of it is a little weird and jarring.
Yeah, the plot points work perfect. I mean, I thought it was a really well done scene. It's just, the actual gameplay suffered a little bit, but it doesn't take long, and it still works, and, before you know it, you're hunting down Martin Lee, who is trying to find the serum to this. Man, we keep skipping major points.
Yeah, right.
There's basically when Otto assembles the Sinister Six, he releases this thing called Dragon's Breath or Devil's Breath.
Devil's Breath. Yeah.
Devil's Breath, and it's this contagion, and everyone in the city is coughing up blood and stuff. And basically, Otto released it because Osborn created it, and he wanted the world to know how awful Osborn is.
Right. It's all about revenge for Otto. It's all about kind of. And not even so much revenge, but more of like showing that Norman Osborn is not a good guy necessarily. That like, he's the mayor, he's putting on this facade, but look at all these things he's done. And by releasing this virus, he kind of infects half the city. So your whole kind of mission in Act 3 is to find this serum. And that's where finding Martin Lee at the end of the game takes you is, he has this serum and you need to get it back from him.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention how in Act 3, Osborn's kind of personal private army, Sable International, it's like a group of mercenaries, they sort of take over the city, and it becomes kind of this weird dystopian hellscape. There's enemies all over the place compared to the earlier parts of the game. I mean, you can't swing past a building without getting a rocket shot at you. And it's this like 1984 military lockdown. All the citizens are complaining about it. Jonah Jameson's going apeshit on his podcast.
His crazy conspiracy theory podcast.
Yeah, because all of his conspiracies are coming true. And so, kind of going along with the tonal shift we talked about earlier, it's a whole different feel. It's really well done, and it wraps up nicely when you find out that the reason Osborn had created this thing is because his son was suffering from some type of degenerative disease, and this was actually the prototype of the cure. And I think Osborn is still convinced that this will work eventually. That's why he kept it around. But obviously it had horrendous side effects. And like you said, he takes shortcuts. He doesn't care about the casualties, doesn't care about the side effects and the collateral damage. And that is, I think, ultimately what Doc Ock wants to punish him for.
Right. And I think all that works really well because it shows that Norman is a very flawed human, obviously, but human nonetheless. Like, he's trying to help his son. And really everybody in this game, at least the major villains, Martin Lee runs a homeless shelter for people, but he has this history of his parents being killed by Norman, and the negative half of him, the demon of part of him, wants that revenge. And Dr. Octopus has done a lot of research to help people his whole life, but he still has that revenge against Norman. And Norman, the people that they're going after, the person that they're going after, he also has this very human side of like, I'm just trying to help my son.
And so, you eventually have this, I thought it was a really fun boss battle with Doc Ock at the end.
Definitely.
I really thought that was fun. And sort of after you beat him, Peter ends up pulling the sort of chip that's in the back of his neck off, which is sort of what allows him to control the arms. And up to this point, they make it seem like really the main reason Doc Ock kind of turned was because this thing started like degenerating parts of his brain that was controlling his emotions or whatever. But even after Peter disables it, and Doc Ock tries to say like, no, it was just the machine, like, Peter, I think, kind of realizes that it was so much of his own choice because that revenge was so powerful inside of him. And it's this really emotional scene where he's saying, like I trusted you and I admired you and I looked up to you, and he's crying, I'm crying, and
Everyone's crying.
And he ends up just leaving him there, I guess not really to die, but to be captured by the police, right?
Yeah.
Because he basically comes to the realization that this wasn't just the neuro interface thing that was messing up his brain. This was Doc Ock turning evil, at least partially by his own decisions.
Right. There's a scene in there I think that works really well, and it's a scene that I didn't know how to feel about at the very beginning, like whenever it happened. But there's a scene where Dr. Octopus reveals that he knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And Peter's like, you knew? And like he says it with this like there's so much like anger there. And I think that scene is trying to like point out that Peter's upset and hurt that Dr. Octavius would do this knowing who he's fighting. Like he's trying to kill Peter Parker. He's ruthless in his attempt to stop Spider-Man so that he can do this, but that's his friend. And I think that scene works really well because it's like him being, you're gonna do all of this and you know me, I'm like, I thought of you as a father. And so Peter realizes he's gone too far and that he can't help him. He's a bad, there's something wrong there that needs to be fixed, and Peter can't do it.
And just when I thought that was going to be the emotional climax,
Nope.
they one-upped themselves, man. So Aunt May, who works at the homeless shelter Feast, she gets the dragon's breath disease. Devil's breath, sorry, whatever. Dragon's breath, I think, is like a D&D skill. It doesn't matter. And so, and they show multiple times how she's coughing up blood, but she's always hiding it from Peter, and she's hiding it from her coworkers, and she's hiding it from MJ. And you end up at the end, one of the Oscorp scientists who has kind of come to your side tells you, hey, we can take this serum and we can get it out to everyone and save millions of lives, but it's going to take another 6 hours, 8 hours. And Peter knows that May doesn't have that long. And gosh, dude, there's just such this emotional, heartfelt scene where they start talking to each other, and he's like, May, I can't lose you, and he comes so close to giving it to her, but she basically, he's like, May, I don't know what to do, and she's like, Peter, like, of course you know what to do. And it reminded me of The Last of Us, spoilers for The Last of Us if you ever played that, at the end where Joel, he realizes that killing, oh gosh, what's her name? Ellie, how did I forget that? that killing Ellie would be necessary in order to develop a cure for it, but he decides he can't lose her because it's like she's become his daughter again after he lost his daughter at the beginning, and he ends up fighting his way out of there and taking her. Well, Peter, literally the opposite approach. Like he has lost his uncle, his mom, his dad. He doesn't want to lose like the last family figure in his life, but he realizes that he has to in order to save all of these lives.
It's a super emotional moment, and it works so well for the character arcs that have been building, of Peter having to kind of continually be this hero in spite of all this pain and suffering that is kind of Spider-Man's whole thing. And to see him almost inject that the serum into the IV is so sad. Like seeing his hand kind of shake as he's about to do it, and then he slams it down on the table, and it's so good. And then the shot that they pull up and you just see the like down shot of May lying there dying and Peter with his like arm on her and he's just crying, it shook me. It was a really, really good scene.
I mean, I was actually tearing up there at the end, man. It was so powerful, and again, with just the beauty of the voice acting and the dialogue and the motion capture and the animations, it felt as real as any sad movie scene I've ever experienced.
100%.
And so that's sort of more or less the end of the game. There's a couple more things that happen. At one point, when Mary Jane is in the Oscorp facility, it looks like Osborn was trying to replicate Peter's powers because there's like all these spiders. One breaks out, attaches herself to her, she carries it over to Feast, where it then bites Miles Morales.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the more common versions of Spider-Man. Miles Morales is a very common version of Spider-Man in the comics.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think most people don't realize that there's more variations than just Peter, because all of the big media versions, the movies and the games have always been Peter, right?
Sure, they've always kind of gone with Peter, and I'm a big fan of the comics and of Spider-Man lore in general. So I kind of knew that was gonna happen, but kind of seeing it all play out was really cool. Like from the very beginning, I was like, okay, Miles is gonna become Spider-Man at some point, I imagine. But when is that gonna happen? How is it gonna take form? And to see it kind of play out there at the end, and then there's a post-credit scene where he kind of reveals to Peter, like, hey, something weird's been happening lately. And Peter, being the kind of awkward goof that he is like, oh, well, there's a time in your life where your body starts to change. And it's like, no, that's not it. And then he, like, jumps on the roof, and he's like, kind of weird, huh? And it's just really cool to see that relationship now have a new layer where they're both spider people, if you will.
Yeah, and it's a Marvel property, so there was not one, but two scenes after the credits.
Always.
So, and something we should have hit on earlier, but the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane and Peter and Miles are both actually explored a good bit in the game. And they're really well done. I think particularly the Mary Jane and Peter one's really good. It feels, like a solid movie romance thing that they have to, they have their fights and they have their drama, but they have to come together and work on it. But you really get a sense for, because at some point they dated and broke up, right?
Yeah.
Because this is 8 years into Spider-Man, and you kind of get this feel for why it didn't work, and you sort of see them repair that and work together, and it's really well done. I honestly thought that was I did not expect that to be as well done as it ended up being.
Yeah, relationships in media in general really are always a hard thing to pull off. A lot of times they try and shoehorn these love triangles in and stuff. And here it's just Spider-Man and Mary Jane, and they explore the complications that come with being Spider-Man. And, and it's really cool that they position it as kind of being both of their faults. It's never just Spider-Man's fault or never just Mary Jane's fault. They both have stuff that makes this relationship hard to work. And it's all explored very, very well throughout the game.
There's a part where he's texting her, and he's kind of like in between her getting back to him, he's like, oh, please don't say no, please don't say no, or like, oh, how do I respond to that? Man, that hit home. That was like a very real depiction of how dating works in like 2018, right?
The whole relationship felt very authentic. I was like, I feel like even if I haven't necessarily been in that exact scenario, I could relate to it very closely, and like, yeah, this is how a relationship plays out. And it all felt very authentic and never like forced or shoehorned in there, or like, oh, come on, that's not realistic. Like, it always worked as if it were a real relationship between two real people.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It did not feel forced at all at any point. I mean, it really felt like two people who had known each other for a long time, and clearly, it's complicated, things going on.
Right.
And, just really well done. And really, I guess just the last thing to say as far as the story goes is that last post-credit scene is Norman Osborn going into a facility where Harry Osborn has been floating in, it looks like a Bacta tank. And there's all these weird vine-looking things growing out of them. It's hard to tell exactly what it is. Obviously setting it up for the DLC, which I'm very glad I got the $80 version.
Right?
But yeah, and clearly it really establishes him as kind of, a human figure, despite him just being this kind of awful villain throughout the whole thing. You realize that, he cares about the fact that his son is dying of this uncurable disease, and he will risk anyone and anything in order to save him.
It's definitely a very relatable moment. And when he says there, and he's like, he puts his hand up to the glass, and he's like, I love you, son. It's delivered really well. And then it's like, he really does care about Harry. And then like Harry's weird vine things like reach out and touch his hand on the glass. I don't know what that's about. Could be symbiote. I don't know. I'm very interested to see how that plays out. Just like any good post-credit scene should,
Well, that about wraps up the spoiler section. Thank you for returning, all of you who skipped straight here. Some closing thoughts, Austin. What do you have to say to people who might look at this game and say, I don't like open world games, I don't like superhero games, this isn't for me?
Yeah, it is those things, but it's also so much more than that. Like, if you're looking at it as, oh, it's just a superhero game, or oh, it's just an open world game, or whatever, you're discounting the great narrative and performances and everything that go throughout the game. You're discounting this really great combat system that's one of the most fun, like, just straight up combat systems I've played in a long time. You're discounting the amazing web swinging from, just this great traversal method to navigate this city. You're discounting a lot of these things that make it more than just your standard open world game or just your standard superhero game. Like, there's a deeper narrative there. There's more compelling combat than basically any superhero game I've ever played. It's so much more than just that.
Yeah, and as someone who I typically do not care for the Marvel movies a whole lot, because while the characters are usually amazing, I always find the overall plot's kind of weak. But this game not only has amazing characters, but I thought the overall story was stellar. And then when it comes to open world games, which I usually don't like because A, they're filled with collectibles I couldn't give less shit about, and two, getting from one side of the open world to the other is such a pain. This game kind of takes care of both of those. We've already discussed how much fun the web slinging is, but even some of the collectibles, one of the early on ones are these backpacks that contain all of these little things from kind of Peter's past. It's like a receipt from his first date with Mary Jane, or like a piece of some of the villain's armor, or something to do with the Avengers. And there's a few lines of dialogue with each one that actually kind of add a lot to the character and a lot to the lore and universe.
Definitely. The whole world feels very alive all the time. That there's always kind of stuff to do, stuff going on. And one of the things I really liked is, like, everything feels like you're supposed to do it. It feels like something Spider-Man would do. It all feels natural to do everything in this world. I went for 100%. I don't normally do that, but it just felt right.
I spent quite a minute doing side quests before I finally got around to the main story. Not because the story was bad, but because I was actually having so much fun with just the collectibles and the landmarks and the side quest and just beating up thugs on the street.
Definitely. It all feels very authentically Spider-Man, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is, like, it's a really good game, and it's also a really, really good game for Spider-Man fans. Like, it's just good in every spectrum.
Yeah, I really can't recommend it enough, even to people who, normally don't like superhero stuff or normally don't like open world. I think it addresses the flaws of those topics in a lot of unique ways and a lot of really well done ways. And as far as, we talked about the cinematics and the storytelling, it's near flawless. It's not flawless, but it's about as close as I think any game gets.
Any of the flaws are easily looked past because of all the things that it does right.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We had a lot of fun doing this one. I hope you guys had fun listening to it. If you haven't played Spider-Man yet, what are you doing? Go get it. I haven't had this much fun with a video game in years. Seriously, it's a great one. Austin, any closing thoughts?
And I think that's it. I definitely recommend it. I went into this game expecting some cool web swinging, expecting some cool combat. I didn't expect the type of story I got. I didn't expect to have this much fun for this long. To want to go all the way to 100%, I wasn't expecting that. But that's how good this game is.
Well, guys, again, thank you so much for listening. We loved having you. We loved talking about it. We hope you liked listening to it. We hope you learned some things. As always, you can catch this episode and others on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Buzzsprout, or you can find our website at cyberpunkfm.com, or you can email us at cyberpunk232@gmail.com. And last but not least, you can follow us at cyberpunkfm on Twitter. Signing off for CyberPunk, I'm your host, Adam Bascle.
And I'm Austin Bascle.
We'll see you next time, guys.